have done this before. The decision, the declaration, the moment where something inside you finally snapped into focus and you said, "This time is different." Maybe it was January 1st. Maybe it was a Monday. Maybe it was the night after a conversation that left you embarrassed about where you still were. You committed, fully. You meant it. And for a while it worked. The first few days had a momentum to them. The new habit held. The old pattern stayed quiet. You started to believe that this version of you, the disciplined one, the focused one, the one who finally had it together, was real and permanent. And then, it did not collapse dramatically. It rarely does. It just quietly dissolved. One skipped day became two. One exception became a pattern. The discipline that felt like identity in week 1 felt like performance by week 3. And somewhere around week 4, you stopped counting. And the story you told yourself, the story almost everyone tells themselves, was the same story it always is. I just did not want it badly enough. I ran out of willpower. I am not the kind of person who can sustain this. That story is wrong. Not motivationally wrong, structurally wrong, factually wrong. The premise, that sustained behavior change is primarily a function of wanting something hard enough, is contradicted by decades of behavioral science, neuroscience, and every serious study ever conducted on how human beings actually change. Today we are going to replace that story with something that actually works. We are going to look at what willpower actually is, why it fails by design, and how the people who have built the lives you are trying to build stopped relying on it entirely. Not because they are more disciplined than you, because they understood something about the architecture of behavior that most people never get taught. Let us start with the biology of willpower, because this is not philosophy, this is mechanism. Your prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for self-regulation, impulse control, long-term planning, and deliberate decision-making, operates on a finite energy budget. Glucose, neural resources, cognitive bandwidth, call it what you want. The name does not matter, the constraint does. Every act of self-control draws on that budget. Every time you resist something, override an impulse, push through discomfort, make a deliberate choice that contradicts what your habits or emotions are pulling you toward, you spend from that account. And the account depletes. This is not metaphor. Researchers have measured it. The phenomenon is called ego depletion, and it has been demonstrated consistently across hundreds of studies in multiple countries with multiple populations. Decision fatigue is real. Self-regulatory fatigue is real. The 10th act of willpower in a day genuinely costs more and yields less than the first, which means the entire strategy of building your life on willpower has a structural ceiling. You are trying to construct something permanent out of a resource that runs out by mid-afternoon. The truly successful are not the people with the most willpower. They are the people who understood this constraint early enough to stop relying on it. They built something different. They built systems. Here is the insight that changes everything. Willpower is the most expensive way to produce good behavior. It requires conscious attention. It requires active override of competing impulses. It requires the full deployment of your prefrontal cortex every single time. And it fails the moment your cognitive resources are depleted, which they always eventually are. Stress depletes them. Poor sleep depletes them. Hunger depletes them. Sustained social performance depletes them. Life depletes them. A system, by contrast, makes good behavior the path of least resistance, not the heroic choice, not the disciplined choice, the easy choice, the default, the thing that happens automatically when you are not trying, when you are tired, when you are distracted, when you are at your most cognitively depleted and vulnerable. The goal of behavioral architecture is to engineer your environment such that the behavior you want requires less friction than the behavior you are trying to avoid, to make the good choice structural rather than effortful, to outsource the decision from your willpower to your design. This is not a metaphor. This is engineering, and it is the most underutilized tool in the entire toolkit of human performance. Let us look at how this actually works in the brain. Your basal ganglia, a structure deep in the brain far below the prefrontal cortex, is the seat of habit formation. It does not make decisions. It does not evaluate options. It runs patterns, automatic, chunked, energy-efficient behavioral sequences that it has learned to associate with specific environmental cues. When a habit is fully formed, the prefrontal cortex goes nearly offline during its execution. You stop thinking. You just do. The behavior runs on the basal ganglia's autopilot, consuming almost no conscious cognitive resources. This is why you can drive a familiar route while having a complex conversation and arrive at your destination with almost no memory of the drive itself. The behavior has been transferred from conscious control to automatic execution. This is also why your morning routine feels different from a new activity. The familiar path is smooth. The unfamiliar one is effortful. Not because you are less capable in the afternoon, because the familiar path has been grooved deep enough that it no longer requires the expensive resource of deliberate attention. The question is not, how do I generate more willpower? The question is, how do I get the behavior I want into the basal ganglia as quickly as possible? How do I engineer the transition from effortful choice to automatic execution? And the answer to that question is environmental design. There is a framework developed by behavioral scientists that captures this with precision. Every habit, every automatic behavior runs on a three-part loop: the cue, the routine, the reward. The cue is the environmental trigger that initiates the sequence. The routine is the behavioral pattern itself. The reward is the signal that tells your brain this sequence is worth storing and repeating. Most people trying to build new behaviors focus almost entirely on the routine. They try to force the behavior through willpower, hoping repetition will eventually make it stick. But they leave the cue and the reward to chance. And that is why it does not stick. Because without a reliable cue, the routine never gets initiated consistently enough to groove. Without a clear and immediate reward, the brain has no signal to encode the behavior as worth repeating. The routine stays in prefrontal territory, conscious, effortful, expensive, and never completes the transfer to basal ganglia automation. The system builder does it differently. They design the cue deliberately. They attach the new behavior to an existing trigger, an existing habit, a time of day, a physical location, that already fires reliably without conscious activation. This is called habit stacking, and it is one of the most powerful behavioral design tools available. You do not introduce a new behavior into an empty context. You anchor it to an existing automatic sequence and let the existing cue carry the new behavior into its wake. They reduce the friction before the routine. They make the first physical step toward the behavior so small, so effortless, so immediately accessible, that the threshold for starting disappears. You do not decide to exercise. You decide to put on the shoes. Because you already know that once the shoes are on, the rest follows automatically. The decision is the shoes. Everything after that is momentum, and they engineer the reward to be immediate rather than deferred, because your brain's reward circuitry runs on a short time horizon. The benefit of exercising today will materialize in 3 months. Your brain cannot feel that. But the immediate satisfaction of completing the sequence, checking the box, feeling the physiological response, experiencing the small internal affirmation of having done the thing, that is immediate. That is what your brain stores. That is what makes it come back. Now let us talk about the environment itself, because this is where most behavioral design frameworks stop short. Your environment is not a neutral backdrop to your decisions. It is an active participant in them. Every element of the physical and digital space you inhabit is either pulling you toward the person you want to become or pulling you toward the person you are trying to move away from. And it is doing this continuously, automatically, without your conscious awareness. The food on the counter is not just food, it is a cue. The phone on the desk is not just a phone, it is a trigger. The layout of your workspace, the default apps on your home screen, the people you see first in the morning, the first content you consume when you open your eyes, all of it is shaping the behavioral sequences that follow, through mechanisms you are not consciously operating. Most people try to change their behavior while leaving their environment completely unchanged. And then they are confused when the old behavior reasserts itself with very little effort. Of course it does. The environment was designed, by accident, by algorithm, by accumulated habit, to produce exactly that behavior. You are trying to swim upstream against a current you built yourself. Environmental redesign is not supplementary to behavior change. It is the primary lever. Before you rely on willpower for a single day, ask yourself, have I changed what is visible? Have I changed what is accessible? Have I changed what is default? Because the behavior your environment makes easiest is the behavior you will produce most consistently, not the behavior you intend, not the behavior you value, the behavior with the lowest friction path. Design the friction, on purpose, strategically. Make the behavior you want the easiest thing in the room. Make the behavior you want to avoid require an extra step, an extra decision, an extra moment of conscious activation. That small increase in friction is often the entire margin between the old pattern and the new one. Let us make this concrete. You want to read more. Do not rely on motivation. Put the book on your pillow before you leave the bedroom in the morning. The cue is getting into bed. The book is already there. The friction is zero. The decision has been made at a moment of high cognitive resources, so that it does not need to be made again at a moment of low ones. You want to stop checking your phone in the first hour of the morning. Do not rely on discipline. Charge it in a different room. The friction of getting up to retrieve it is enough to break the automatic sequence. You have introduced a small physical obstacle between the cue and the routine, and that obstacle is doing the work your willpower was exhausting itself trying to do. You want to exercise consistently. Do not rely on motivation. Sleep in your workout clothes. Pack the bag the night before and put it by the door. Reduce the number of decisions between waking up and starting to move to as close to zero as you can get. Each decision you eliminate is one less opportunity for your prefrontal cortex to find a reason to defer. You want to eat differently. Do not rely on discipline in the moment. Change what is visible and accessible in the kitchen. Your behavior in that environment will follow the path of least resistance almost every time. Design the path. These are not hacks. These are applications of the same mechanisms your brain has been running your entire life. You are just finally deciding to run them deliberately instead of accidentally. There is a deeper principle underneath all of this, and it is the one that separates behavioral change that lasts from behavioral change that cycles. Identity precedes behavior, but environment precedes identity. James Clear articulated this clearly. The most durable behavior change happens when the behavior is an expression of identity rather than an act of willpower. You do not run because you want to get fit. You run because you are a runner. The behavior is who you are, not something you are trying to do. But here is what most people skip. Identity does not change through declaration. It changes through accumulated evidence. Every time you complete the behavior, every small, friction-reduced, system-supported repetition, you are casting a vote for a new identity. You are giving your brain one more data point that says, this is what someone like me does. And over time, with enough consistent evidence, the identity shifts. Not because you decided it would, because the behavior proved it could. The system is not just a productivity tool, it is an identity construction mechanism. When you design your environment to make the good behavior easy, you are not just producing the behavior more efficiently. You are accumulating the evidence that rewrites who you believe you are. And the person who believes they are the kind of person who does the thing will do the thing automatically, sustainably, and without exhausting themselves in the process. That is the end game. Not discipline, not motivation, not a heroic ongoing act of willpower. An identity, built by a system, expressed in a life. Stop trying to be stronger than your environment. Build an environment that makes you strong by default. Stop asking your willpower to carry a weight it was never designed to carry for the duration you are asking it to carry it. Design the path, reduce the friction, stack the cues, engineer the defaults. Give your behavior somewhere easy to go. The goal was never to try harder. The goal was always to need to try less. Because the life you are building, the one that actually lasts, that actually compounds, that actually becomes the thing you envisioned when you made that declaration at the beginning, that life is not built in the heroic moments of maximum effort. It is built in the ordinary moments, when the system runs quietly in the background, doing the work while you focus on what actually requires your full attention. Stop performing discipline. Start designing it. Next time, we are going to go somewhere that makes most people genuinely uncomfortable. Inside the mind of the smartest person in the room, not to celebrate them, to diagnose them. Because there is a pattern, consistent, documented, neurologically rooted, where the highest performing, most credentialed, most demonstrably intelligent individuals become the most resistant to changing their minds. The same cognitive architecture that builds the brilliant argument becomes the cage that traps them inside it. We are going to look at what actually happens in a high-intelligence brain when the evidence turns against a held belief, why the experience is physiologically similar to physical threat, why the smarter you are, the harder it becomes to say those three words, I was wrong, and why the ability to say them, genuinely, without performance, without defensiveness, is not a vulnerability. It is the rarest and most powerful form of intelligence that exists. That conversation is next. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, the frameworks, the neuroscience, the structural analysis underneath the headlines that most people never see, then the most useful thing you can do right now is stay close to this channel. Not because we ask you to, because the conversations we are building here compound. Each episode connects to the last. The frameworks stack, and the gap between where you are and where you are trying to go closes faster when you have the right architecture for thinking about it. Subscribe if you have not. Share this with one person who is still blaming their willpower for a problem that was always an environmental design issue. And we will see you in the next one.